Last year, China's fertility rate fell to 0.93 births per woman. There were fewer births in China than back in 1776. The infamous one-child policy has been devastatingly successful. But China is not alone. Fertility rates are falling across the world. As the United Nations reported, the world is heading towards population decline faster than almost anybody predicted. In the latest UN population forecast, the median projection is for the global population to peak around the middle of this century. And on the surface, that looks fairly benign. But the problem is that these assumptions are based on forecasts that really don't make much sense. For example, take fertility in South Korea. It has collapsed in recent years to one of the lowest in the world, yet the UN assumes it will rebound in the coming years, and that would represent one of the most unexpected demographic shifts. It is far more plausible that fertility rates will continue to fall as they have done in previous years. As the OECD notes, once fertility falls very low, it actually creates the conditions that keep it low. And population forecasters have repeatedly underestimated how far fertility rates can fall. Forecasts are continually revised downward. And the result is that societies are being hollowed out, schools are closing, being converted into care homes for the elderly. Society is changing in ways we are not prepared for. It is unprecedented. And now, in the West, falling fertility is often blamed on a cost of living crisis. And certainly the cost of housing, education, general living expenses makes having more children really quite expensive. And many couples say they would like to have more children, but don't want to have the financial cost. But the thing is, with this argument, we have to be aware that fertility is falling in almost every country. It's a global phenomenon, whether housing is cheap or expensive. In Western Europe, there is widespread economic pessimism in 2026, but even in countries with quite strong economic optimism, such as China and India, fertility has collapsed. And what does having a fertility rate of 0.8 actually mean? In South Korea's case, it implies that a population will fall from around 50 million to 20 million within 2 generations. And it's the kind of population collapse that cannot be solved by increasing immigration or raising the retirement age to 70. What it means is schools closing, rural areas deserted, and even small towns becoming wastelands. There are also less obvious effects. Average costs across society will tend to rise. Take electricity or water. In the UK, it's really quite expensive, but most of the costs are what we call fixed costs, such as maintaining and transporting the national infrastructure. With fewer people, these fixed costs are spread over lower demand, pushing up the average cost per household. Now, in the UN's 2024 forecasts, there's also an assumption that Africa will maintain high fertility rates, leading sub-Saharan Africa to gain a much larger share of the global population. Now, this may happen to some extent, but I would be skeptical about that projection, because fertility is already falling across Africa, and demographers struggle to obtain up-to-date data about what is happening in real term. Take Kenya, their fertility rate has fallen from around 8 in the late 1970s to 3.2 today. Now, one explanation for falling fertility is the spread of smartphones and the internet, because when people across the world have access to the same information, entertainment and social norms, people are facing really very similar cultural choices. Now, if the smartphone theory of falling fertility is correct, or at least has some degree of merit, Africa may soon face the same demographic trajectory as the rest of the world as smartphone use increases. Given the choice, parents increasingly prefer fewer children with better prospects. Now, one of the most striking features of the decline in fertility rates is that it spans very different cultures. Take Turkey, a predominantly Muslim country, now has a fertility rate of 1.48, very similar to the UK and the United States. Population researcher Lyman Stone argues that fertility decline is not primarily economic, but cultural. And let's go back to the smartphone generation theory. There do seem to be two significant factors that stand out. Firstly, people spend far less time meeting in person. Young people can spend hours on screens. For men, it tends to be playing Minecraft, Call of Duty, watching YouTube videos like this. 90% of my subscribers are men on YouTube. For women, it tends to be things like Instagram and I don't know what else. But anyway, when it comes to internet use, it really can feel like men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And it's not just that fertility is declining. Alcohol consumption, drug use, sexual activity are all falling amongst young people. So much of the 1960s, it's a new cultural revolution. Dating apps were designed to encourage relationships, yet paradoxically, people are dating far less, and marriage rates are falling very rapidly. Social media promotes idealized images of relationships, making reality feel disappointing by comparison. And this is reflected in the sharp decline in marriage rates and rise in single-person households. And it's one of the defining features of our age, and actually a very significant factor feeding into the housing crisis. Now, pick up a textbook from the 1980s or 1990s, and you will find stark warnings about overpopulation. We can't cope with all the people. And it does seem that we seem to swing from one panic to another. But if fertility rates keep falling below 1, we will start to see population figures that look a lot more like this. And once the decline sets in, it becomes very hard to reverse it. And the truth is that this is now a realistic outcome. So how will this affect the economy? Well, initially with a fall in fertility rates, there can actually be a demographic dividend because you get a smaller number of children, but a larger working age population. And that supports higher savings, higher investment and growth. And this has helped much of Southeast Asia in recent years. But this demographic dividend then turns into a liability because when that population bulge reaches retirement age, old age dependency suddenly rises very sharply. And at that point, governments must spend more money simply to stand still. Pensions and healthcare spending will all rise, whilst public investment is squeezed and reduced. At the same time, debt and taxes have to go up. Aging societies tend to experience lower economic growth, weaker productivity, and less innovation. And you can see here that as the share of a population over 60 rises, growth slows down. And this is a recipe for political dissatisfaction. Taxes rise, public services deteriorate, and living standards stagnate. And of course, older people become a powerful voting bloc. They're more numerous and also more likely to vote. Take this example of in London, over 65s receive free public transport, despite the fact that the average pensioner couple have more wealth and around $4,000 a year more disposable income than, say, a young couple with 3 children. Now, you might think that a rational response to this population crisis is to subsidise child rearing, subsidise people to have more births. And in recent years, many countries are now trying pro-natal policies. But to a large extent, the results have been really very disappointing. Hungary spent heavily with very little effect. South Korea offered up to $700 a month, yet fertility remains below 0.8. Cultural forces appear stronger than modest financial incentives. Lyman Stone suggested achieving a replacement fertility rate of 2.1 might require additional child benefits of $10,000 to $20,000 per year. But how do you fund that kind of child benefits when pension spending is rising, growth is slowing, and taxes are going up already? Low fertility also reinforces itself. Large families were once the norm. Having no children once carried social stigma. But today, childlessness is common, and large families seem really quite unusual. Once, people feared missing out by not having children, but now children are often seen as an obstacle to career or even basic financial survival. Now, as you know at Economics Help, we always try to look on the bright side, and a falling population does have potential benefits. In theory, housing and land should become cheaper over time. It'll take a while to get there. Also, very important, environmental pressures will ease, reducing the stress on fossil fuel consumption and reducing stress on water supplies, land use and ecosystems. But the adjustment is always going to be uneven. In Italy, population decline has coincided with people fleeing rural areas for cities. You might be able to buy a house for €1 in a ghost town, but few people actually want to live there. Now, a smaller population might reduce pressure to build on green land and give people more space. Will technology ride to the rescue? Automation, drones and AI may replace some of the low-skilled jobs and free labour for care work, but for all the potential of technology, it can't repopulate schools or revive ghost towns. And AI is not a cure to the social fragmentation that has been occurring in recent years. What about immigration? Well, it can always act as a temporary buffer. But with fertility falling globally, the pool of potential migrants will shrink. And of course, immigrants themselves tend to adopt the same low fertility patterns over time and will age just like native-born people, causing a similar aging population. In the UK, population decline will be slow at first, but we will have to face this aging population. People will have to work longer. Retirement may become shorter than in the past. But the direction of travel is clear. And if we start to follow what's happening in other countries and fertility rates continue to fall, the shock may be even greater. And even with population still modestly rising, the economy is still struggling. And this makes it hard to fund more investment in trying to change the trajectory that we're all on. This video looks into some of the economic problems that we face this year. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments below.